Welcome everyone to Looking Back but Also Forward, a refresher on the employer mandate. Thank you all so much for joining us. Our moderator for today's call is Patrick Myers. He will be answering the questions you send through the Q&A today. We will try our best to answer all of your questions, but if for whatever reason we are unable to get to your question today, please follow up with your advisor for further assistance. Today's presentation is being recorded. We will be sharing the recordings in the follow-up email and on the NFP website. If there are any portions of this call that you missed, by Friday you will receive an email with a link to the full recording. The PowerPoint slides used during this presentation will be shared in the same email. At this time, I'd like to introduce our speakers for today's webinar. Joining us today are Jill Brooking, Vice President of Benefits Compliance at NFP, and Elizabeth Allen, Vice President and Counsel of Benefits Compliance at NFP. We're very excited to have them speaking with us today. It is my pleasure to hand over the call to our speaker. Jill, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I'm really glad to see everyone here. Apparently we chose a good topic because we had good registration and a good turnout. Before we get started, I want to say happy birthday to Dolly Parton, that is. She is one of our national treasures that is still with us. Rest in peace, Betty White. So today, yes, we have me and Beth. And so if you want to advance the slides. Oh, of course, our disclaimer. Now more than ever, things change quickly, and sometimes they change back to where they were. So as always, this is for what we know today, current as of today. And this is just general guidance and information, which segues nicely into the other thing I wanted to say for today before I do the poll. Today, we're going to go quickly, and we are going to just give you general overview of issues. So don't feel like you have to take lots of notes or details. The only notes you need to take today are jotting down an issue that you think you may have at your company, and you want to check in with your consultant later. Okay, so Happy New Year. To start off the new year, this is our poll today. How is 2022 starting off for you? A, good things are happening. B, I choose to have a good year regardless of circumstances. Or C, different year, same chaos. Okay, Beth, you and I cannot vote. Our other team members who are handling the questions in the Q&A today also cannot vote. Okay, let's close it out. This is a pretty easy question, and let's see what people are saying. Oh, I love that. So it's a good mix all over, but the winner, just about half of the respondents said, I choose to have a good year regardless of circumstances. That's really great. And that's the box I would choose for myself as well. NFP is really pushing a lot of wellness resources out. And we have a lot available for clients. So if you want to learn more about that, talk to your consultant. We are twice a week. We have a Zoom webinar where we can meditate, guided meditation. It's really nice. Okay. Thank you for that. If we want to move on. Okay, now back to the work. Okay, so again, here's our agenda, and we are going to talk about general concepts with the employer mandate. We're going to identify common issues that we see with employers. And then we're not really going to go into the weeds of a lot of them. Basically, we're going to tell you what you might be doing wrong, and then we'll just leave it at that, and you'll have to consult with your advisor. Okay, so there you go. For each subject, brief overview, what employers get wrong, and resources. And I do want to say again, these are common. So if you feel targeted by one question that comes up, you're not in that boat alone. That's why we're having this conversation today. So who's an AL? Who's an applicable large employer? What is a full-time employee? What coverage do you have to offer? What if you don't? What are those penalties? And then changes of status, measurement methods, and plan documentation. The good news is we have revised white papers on all of these topics if you want the details. We're going to mention that as we go along. So if one particular topic hits you, you can request the white paper on that topic for all the details. All right. Moving ahead. This part is the refresher part that hopefully will make you feel good if you know these things, but maybe you're new to the industry and it'll be new for you. So what is the employer mandate when we say that? And just to remind you, if you want to send content related questions, send that to the Q&A. And then if you have logistical type questions, send that through the chat. Okay, so what is the employer mandate? Applicable large employers, and we will abbreviate that from now on in this presentation as an ALE. That's not beer, it's an ALE, ALE. Applicable large employers must offer full-time employees and their child and their children minimum essential coverage that meets both minimum value and affordability or risk pay and penalties. What? Okay, that's what we're going to spend the rest of this time explaining. So here we go. Are you an ALE? Are you an applicable large employer? So each law has its own way of defining who is subject to that law and on how to count it. So even though the delineation for the employer mandate is 50, this is different than how you would count 50 for, say, FMLA purposes. So for the employer mandate, it applies to employers with 50 or more full-time employees, including equivalents. How do we get to that number? Well, it is based on the number of full-time employees and equivalents, which we will now abbreviate as FTEs, in the previous calendar year. So to determine, I should say, if you are subject to the employer mandate and related reporting in 2022, which you would report in 2023, you look at how many employees you had in 2021. So now that we have finished the year, this is the time to do it. A lot of you are doing reporting right now for the 2021 plan or calendar year. That means that you had 50 or more FTEs in 2020, which made you subject to the employer mandate and reporting in 2021, which is why you were doing the forms now in 2022. Okay, so you have to count all related employers. So think controlled group rules. So if this doesn't matter about EINs, this doesn't matter about if you have two different types of businesses. This is, do the owners of your company own other companies? Are they related by ownership? That includes spouses generally and children. You don't have to count certain individuals, self-employed owners. And so to determine that, you look at how they're treated for tax purposes. If they are, say, receiving a K-1 or they are a more than 2% shareholder in an S Corp, don't count them. But if you're a C Corp and they just receive a Form W-2, count them. Employees on TRICARE or VA coverage, if you know, then don't count them in the total. And then seasonal workers who are employed 4 months or less per year. Note, this is different than a seasonal employee, which we'll talk about later. This is only for calculating size. Seasonal workers 4 months or less can be excluded. Seasonal means they're hired at the same time every year, and the nature of their work or the business need is seasonal. Okay. For every month in the year, you count all the employees who worked 30 hours a week or 130 hours. That's your full-time bucket. Then take the hours of all the other workers. That would be part-timers, anyone who didn't work full-time hours. Total them up, divide by 120. Yes, that's right. For one purpose, it's 130. Another one, it's 120. That's not a typo. It's just a crazy law. This is the number of full-time equivalents. So then what are we going to do? We're going to add the people from the full-time bucket and the calculation from step 2, which are called the equivalents. We're going to add those up, do that for every month in the previous calendar year and divide by 12. If that result is 50 or more, dun, da, 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 you are an ALE. There's no rounding, even if you come up with 49.99. Congratulations, you're not an ALE. Okay. And so what are the common mistakes we see here? What do employers get wrong? Not understanding the prior year calculation, and that can be a combination of either they think it's by plan year or they think they become, we just passed 50 in June, so now I'm subject to the employer mandate. Nope, you're going to be subject to the employer mandate for an entire calendar year based on the previous calendar year. You don't become subject in the middle of the year, except under the sticky situation, mergers and acquisitions. You actually could become part of an ALE middle of the year if you're a small group and then you were acquired by a large group in the middle of the year. The other mistake that we see all the time, not counting employees of all controlled group members. This is so common. Let's say you are a franchise owner and you own 7 locations of a brake pad store. You are the only owner of 7 brake pad stores. All 7 have to be counted together to see how many total employees you have. You can't say each location, because it's its own location, and EIN is a different employer. I have seen a spouse, I've seen a wife own a farm and the husband own a hardware store. Together, they have to be counted. That's common ownership. Okay, next situation. Anything you want to add there, Beth? If you, of course, I don't need to.
Oh, I was
don't
just
need
going
to
to say,
invite you.
no worries. Happy New Year, everybody. I was just going to say with the M&A guidance there, we've run into this problem quite a bit, where, for example, you might have a large employer who buys another large employer. That's pretty easy, right? Both of them are ALEs. They were before, they will be after. But it gets not as easy if you have, let's say, a large employer that swallows a smaller employer, or a small employer that merges with a small employer, but they're then maybe large enough to be an ALE. And with that, as we always do with mergers and acquisitions, please talk to your counsel while, before hopefully the transaction is done, so that both parties kind of understand what their obligations are going to be under the mandate.
Thanks. Okay, what resources do we have on this? Dun, 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 dun. All and more than you need, probably. So we have a white paper determining if an employer is an ALE, and then we have questions and answers there. So those are links to the IRS. And then we have our white paper that is the graphic there. So you would ask your consultant for applicable large employer white paper, and then the IRS has those links. And yes, you will get a copy of these slides within 2 days if you previously registered. Who is a full-time employee for an offer of coverage? We're done determining size, so we're over that. We have decided we are an applicable large employer. Now, how do I determine who's full-time so I can offer them coverage? So again, a full-time employee is anyone who works on average 130 hours a month or 30 hours a week. This includes any hours for which they receive compensation. That includes vacation, PTO, sick time, jury duty, and on-call time. That's not on the slide, but that's a big one. There was even an IRS FAQ years ago that said somebody was receiving, let's say, $1.35 an hour to be on call, and they had to abstain from drinking, going out of town just in case they were called in. That was considered compensable time. Those hours had to be counted. So any hour for which the employee receives compensation, that's an hour of service that goes towards that full-time calculation. And then remember, you have to offer coverage to children as well. So who are the children? Until the child reaches age 26. That's, all of you already know that. That's something everyone is comfortable with. And that includes biological and adopted children, but not necessarily step or foster or the children of a domestic partner. That gets into one of those other situations that we'd have to look at, like state law and stuff, but generally just for employer mandate, those are the rules. And so where can you go wrong? What do we see as the issues? So people who have been around in the industry for, this whole time, it was in 2010, if you can believe that this law passed. Crazy. For me, who's been at the entire time, it seems like only 5 years. But if you're new to the industry, let's face it, that was 12 years ago. We could easily have a lot of people who were not working in this industry, in HR, in benefits, in 2010. So this is, what now. So the issue is temporary employees or interns. A lot of times we will hear people say, well, interns aren't eligible or temps aren't eligible. The employer mandate in ACA, there are no exceptions for temporary employees or interns. That's not a thing. So you have to look at them carefully. So what the employer mandate says is that those that are working full-time hours have to be offered coverage by the first day of the 4th month of employment, or the employer is at risk for a penalty. So some employers are like, hey, we just won't let people work, past 3 months. Those are our temporary employees. That's fine if you stick to it. But what happens is you like someone and that you end up keeping them. And then you want to apply the waiting period to them at that point. Well, now we're past the first day of the 4th month. What are you going to do with that? So temporaries can be very tricky. And interns, if you have a seasonal intern program like summer interns, yeah, you could treat them as seasonal employees and use the look back measurement method, which we'll get into. But just saying all interns, and I've talked to a lot of companies and NFP, we have interns all during the year, not just summer. So we cannot say our interns are seasonal and put them in a look back measurement and generally not offer them coverage. We can't do that for interns. You can only put them in a seasonal bucket for interns, again, if it's the same time of year that you hire them. Staffing agencies, this is a whole other conversation, but blanketly saying we don't offer coverage to our temps from a staffing agency because we don't give them a paycheck is not a full analysis. The preamble to the final regulations actually say that if someone is from a temp agency working for only you consistently, and they've been there again for 3 months or more, then common law, they're yours. You would have to contract with the staffing agency to make that different. So those contracts are key. Misunderstanding the look back measurement method, how to apply it, even documenting what you're doing. This is where we're going to spend some time today, because I would say that's the biggest mistake going on right now. Here on the sticky situations, I've already mentioned the on-call hours, employees paid by commission. You may have to do an analysis or a kind of estimation of hours for people who work on commissions. We've already talked about the staffing, and teachers and employees of educational. You can't just automatically say, well, they don't work 3 months of the year, so if I average that out, they're not a full-time employee. If the school is closed for 2.5 months or 2 months, and the employees don't have to report during those, that you disregard that period of time for the measurement and looking at them at full time. There's a special rule for educational institutions. You can't average them over 12 months if the institution is closed for some of that time. Again, just pointing out issues. It may seem like I'm giving you a lot of problems and I'm creating more questions than answers, but that's what we're doing today. Just stirring the pot today, giving you more to think about in 2022. We should redo the poll at the end, and then more people are going to be in category C. So our white paper on the right-hand side, employer mandate full-time employees, helping you determine which ones are full-timers. And we go into more detail there about interns and seasonal. And then here are the IRS resources. The IRS has some great information, FAQs. So lots for you. Don't feel like you have to write down URLs.
Agreed. Thanks, Jill. And I will say on this white paper specifically, all of those sticky situations we mentioned on the previous slide are actually addressed in this white paper. Like, it's super detailed. And so if you have any questions about some of those kind of weird, if you will, employees who might be on call or who might be leased employees, then this white paper actually goes through all of that. So thank you, Jill, for kicking us off with the first couple of refresher pieces of the employer mandate. I am going to go forward here and talk about what coverage must be offered and when, okay? So we started off with the question of whether or not you're an employer that even has to offer this coverage to full-timers. Then we started off talking about, or we went to talking about who is full-time and has to be offered that coverage. And now we're going to talk about what coverage has to be offered to those full-time employees. And so the requirement there is just that the employer basically offers minimum essential coverage that is both minimum value and affordable to substantially all of their full-time employees, okay? And that substantially all phrase, which it gets a little annoying with kind of benefits law, because like substantially all can mean different things for different laws, right? Here, substantially all is 95% or more. So it literally means like pretty much all of them, right? And so we're going to be looking to see if you're making that offer of coverage that's minimum essential coverage and minimum value and affordable to substantially all of those employees. And so, I included the definitions here, or just kind of concepts that relay the definitions. Minimum essential coverage, I think, is the easiest one because it's pretty broad, and pretty much any insured product or self-funded plan is likely going to be minimum essential coverage. And so keep in mind that, especially if you're one of our clients, likely you are offering coverage that is going to be considered minimum essential coverage, because pretty much all of the group coverage out there is going to fit this definition. Minimum value is a little different because these are plans that pay at least 60% of the costs that are going to be incurred by the participant and their beneficiaries. And this takes kind of some math, which our team tries our best not to do. But the actuaries and other math people in the industry analyze plans to make sure that they're minimum value. Again, if you're fully insured, chances are your plan is minimum value. Likewise, if you're a self-funded plan, just because of the fact that we know that these plans have to meet that minimum value threshold. And so generally they're going to be, okay? And then lastly, this concept of affordability and the coverage being affordable. Really, the law was actually written to say that it has to be affordable based on your household income. But obviously, most employers don't know what their employees' household income is, right? Like, we don't necessarily know if our employees have a spouse or even maybe an adult dependent who contributes to their household and makes a certain amount of money. And so what we got from the government on affordability is kind of basically the rule is that an employee's premium for the lowest cost of self-only coverage can exceed this annually indexed percentage. And when the employer mandate started, which I was going to start off by saying, man, we're like 7 years into the employer mandate and it's kind of hard to believe. But when the employer mandate started, this percentage was 9.5 and it vacillates each year. And so this year, the percentage is 9.61. And so that's the percentage that we're going to be using for 2022 to make sure that coverage is affordable. I think this is one of those years where the percentage went down. Jill, correct me if I'm wrong. Was it higher last year? I think it was. I think it was like 9.8 something.
Yes,
In 2021.
9.83, I think.
Yeah, no, and it says it on the next slide, I think so. So this is one of those years where the affordability percentage actually went down. And so you want to be careful that you didn't just necessarily use the same numbers as last year because the percentage went down this year. Okay. And so when it comes to affordability, remember that I mentioned that the government doesn't really have a way to know like what's affordable. And employers, even in trying to determine kind of what's affordable, it's kind of hard to say what's affordable for each person. And so the DOL gave us, or the departments gave us, 3 safe harbors that an employer can use to say that the coverage is affordable. And they're kind of all different in how they work. And we've included boxes on each of these just to kind of give you an idea. From a high level, Form W-2 wages safe harbor really just takes the amount of wages that someone makes throughout the year and bases that percentage, again, 9.61 this year, and then kind of does the formula where it's like 9.61 times how much you made all year divided by 12 would be the monthly premium that you would expect. I think the interesting thing about Form W-2, obviously, is it works if you have a population of employees who make the same thing from year to year. If they don't, then it may not be as reliable to use that particular safe harbor, but there are some employers who it is appropriate for. The federal poverty level, I think, is really the easiest one, in my opinion, if you actually fit this. And this is based on the idea of kind of what the federal poverty line is each year, and the idea that, okay, if we look at this as a minimum threshold of how much someone would make and whether or not it would be affordable based on if these people were on the federal poverty line or at the federal poverty line, then basically, as long as your coverage or your lowest offer of self-only coverage is below that, then it's automatically affordable, right? We have a lot of employers who might be generous and they offer their lowest level of self-only coverage for 0 employee contribution. They would definitely fit this federal poverty level safe harbor, and that's kind of the, that's an easy one. They automatically know that they're considered affordable. And then the last one is rate of pay, and that is basically where an employee's rate, if it's hourly or even salary, is basically multiplied by either 130 hours or it's multiplied by the affordability threshold to determine if it is affordable. And we see this one a lot, especially for employers with a large group of hourly employees. We see this method happen quite a bit, but then sometimes there can be some issues with it. If, for example, someone's rate of pay changes in the middle of the year, things can get a little bit more difficult to follow, especially when you set the premiums at the beginning of the year. And so keep in mind that these are the 3 affordability safe harbors that an employer can use, and which one is the best for you is just going to depend on your workforce and kind of what you have going on with your premiums and with your company. And then finally, we included in this question, when must the coverage be offered? And I think this is the easiest part of what we're going to talk about today for the most part, because under the employer mandate, the requirement is that the coverage has to be offered by the first day of the 4th month after hire. Right. Now, this is interesting because we have a few times where, different concepts converge and it's kind of hard to understand how they work together. And so there's also the requirement under the ACA that the waiting period be no more than 90 days. And so that's kind of interesting because, if you're trying to satisfy both the employer mandate and that first day of the 4th month and the 90-day waiting period limitation, you have to be careful how you say when people are eligible. I think a lot of employers pretty much default to, let's say, at the latest, first of the month following 60 days, so that you don't ever get to that kind of 90 day, waiting period or a 91-day waiting period. But just keep in mind that generally the requirement under the employer mandate is that you offer them coverage by that first month of the 4th, or first day of the 4th month, excuse me. And so what do we see employers get wrong? And so we see sometimes where employers will kind of say, okay, we have this one group of employees and we just, for whatever reason, do not want to offer them coverage. And that happens, there might be a high turnover group, things like that might happen. It might be a group that just doesn't take coverage, ever. And they want to say, well, we'll take the risk because we think that they are way less than the 5%. And you want to be very, very, very careful here to make sure that that is true, because one of the dynamics of this particular 5% rule is that it does actually apply on that ALE member basis. And so Jill mentioned, as it pertains to counting up the 50 to determine if the company is subject to the employer mandate, it doesn't really matter on an EIN level. But this is one of those things that does matter, right? So let's say that you're some 2,000 employee group, but you have subdivisions that are much smaller, right? And so you might say, okay, 2,000, 95% of 2,000, and I'm not going to math today. Let me see, 2,000, 100. Yeah, I think like 100 people or less would keep you below 5%. Somebody with math skills will tell me in the comments.
I never math, and if John Deem is on this call, he will do it. I think there's some. Yes, I think there's some rule about it. Yeah, it's 5%, or 5 people or less. The way that works out. So if you had less than 100 and it was 5 people, I think that's the way it works.
Something like that. Yeah,
John, if you're here, you can let us know.
Thank you. And then when you look at it on an ALE member basis, let's say you do have that 2,000 life group, but let's say that one subdivision of the group only has 20 people. If more than 5% of that 20 people isn't offered coverage, then that ALE member is actually going to fail this. So you got to be careful, because it's kind of just a weird application of this particular rule. Another issue that we see is using the wrong safe harbor, or not doing those calculations in advance, right? We get a lot of employers who, shall remain nameless and come to us at reporting time and ask us what their safe harbor was. You would have known what your safe harbor was, hopefully, before you set the premium, which for reporting would have been well over a year before you have to report, because of that kind of, difference in what Jill was talking about as far as the year you're looking at to determine if you're an ALE versus the year that you're an ALE versus the year that you report. And so it's just not the best idea when nobody knows what the affordability safe harbor was, or it's not basically used at the beginning when you're actually setting the premium that you're going to apply to people all year. And then sticky situations, you'll keep seeing this thread of like M&A situations, because it's just always really difficult. We have a lot of employers who might buy another employer, and the question is, well, when do I have to offer their full-time employees coverage? If they come over to us, what does that look like? And again, we're going to reiterate that you're going to want to talk to counsel and just make sure that you understand your obligations there. But newsflash, if you bring over a group of people who are working for you full-time, chances are you're going to have to offer them coverage under the employer mandate. Now, leaves of absence can also affect affordability in some cases, and we talked about this kind of with the rate of pay. And so you want to be careful when you're figuring out which safe harbor you're going to do, and kind of look at those leaves of absence to figure out what that might mean for the rules. And we get a lot of questions about that. And so it's not the easiest thing to do, but just keep in mind that you want to be mindful that that can be an issue. And then one final issue we have here is just the misclassification of independent contractors. Independent contractors should not be getting coverage from an employer. Okay, the issue of misclassification basically says that you have this group of people who are independent contractors, meaning they're not your common law employee, and they should not be receiving benefits as if they were your common law employee. If they do, then it makes it seem like they should be your common law employee, and you just haven't been paying taxes for them. And so that becomes an issue, and you just want to be careful about that, especially in the situation as it pertains to kind of offering them coverage, because the answer there is you shouldn't be. Okay. Or if they are truly your common law employees and you've been misclassifying them as independent contractors, then you should be offering them coverage. So that can kind of go that way as well. And so some resources on this, the IRS has a very specific kind of page on minimum value and affordability where they have some questions on that. And then we actually combine the question on affordability itself and penalties. And so you'll find a white paper on that topic as well. And then kind of just going through with what the penalties are, because sometimes we'll get employers who say, again, we have this group of employees that we're just going to risk the, failing or violating the employer mandate. What does that mean? And we have to point out, that employers are going to risk penalties if even one full-time employee goes to the exchange and receives a premium tax credit. Okay, that is what's going to trigger the possibility for penalties. And then once that happens, there are two of them to be concerned about. The first one is called penalty A, or the sledgehammer. And that one is basically if you fail to offer minimum essential coverage to 95% of your employees or more. And that's going to be $2,700 for the year, pretty much for every employee, full-time employee you have, minus 30. Okay. And so that's why we call it the sledgehammer, because it's a whole lot of money. It's not just for the people who went to the exchange. It's if one person goes to the exchange and you don't offer coverage to 95% of your full-time employees, then you're going to pay that penalty for everybody, minus 30. Okay. Penalty B is called the tack hammer because it's not quite as intense. And this is basically going to be an amount that you're going to pay if you don't offer minimum value affordable coverage to a full-time employee. And so this is a situation where you still have somebody who goes to the exchange and receives a premium tax credit. You're not paying penalty A because you did offer coverage to 95% or more of your employees, but you might have someone who did not receive an affordable offer of coverage. Okay, so you know that their coverage wasn't affordable. Then you're going to pay the penalty, which is $4,060 for 2021. And that breaks down to like $338 a month, but you're going to pay that for that employee for every month that they did not receive affordable coverage. And so those are the two penalties. And frankly, how this comes up is that the IRS sends a 226J letter when an employee received a premium tax credit, and when there's usually some other failure that's indicated on the forms that you're providing to the IRS. So what are the kind of things that we see employers get wrong? As I mentioned, kind of just miscalculating the risk for penalties, right? If you're going to play that game that like, okay, there are certain people that you're just not going to offer coverage and you're going to take that risk of paying the penalties, usually because maybe there's a cost reason for that, or a cost benefit analysis that goes into that, then basically, you want to make sure that when you're making that calculation that it's correct, right? We've had some employers who think that they're right at that 5%, and if they're above, then that becomes a problem. And so keep in mind that if that is a risk you're going to take, that you're calculating that well. We also have some employers who feel like, okay, what are the odds that the IRS is going to catch us? And we can't tell you, obviously, kind of what the exact odds are that you're going to get caught, but we can say that the IRS is actively sending these letters out. So, there is a chance that you could get it. We'll also mention, obviously, a vendor is not really doing this type of work for you and doesn't really have any responsibility to do any of it for you. So even employers who use, let's say, a vendor for tracking, and we'll talk a little bit more about tracking to come, but even employers who are using a vendor for tracking have to keep in mind that that vendor is not making sure that you're compliant as much as they're just tracking the information you ask them to track. And then obviously, if you get a 226J letter, please don't ignore it because then obviously it escalates to the point where you get a bill from the IRS, and we don't want that to happen. And then sticky situations, again, obviously the running theme is just M&A, and just the fact that there is some exposure there. If a company buys another company that, let's say, did not meet their employer mandate obligations, and then obviously just reviewing the Form 1094 and 1095C can be helpful and help you catch things so that you don't get a 226J letter. So here are our resources on this one, and the IRS has a page on employer payments and how they're calculated. And then we also have, like I said, that white paper that talks about penalties and affordability as well. And so that is the end of our brief, but actually like 2/3 of our conversation, refresher on the employer mandate. And now we're going to go into the difficult topics, okay? And here your head's going to probably spin a little bit, but these are the topics that we see the most concern with. And so we're going to do a quick reminder of what the rules are, and then we're going to go through some examples and kind of just let you know some practical tips, okay? So the first one is the measurement method and those rules. And so Jill, I will invite you to talk about the rules for measurement methods.
Thank you, Beth. Okay, now we're getting into the good stuff. Okay, so there are actually two different ways to measure employee hours. What? I thought there was only the look back measurement method. No, there are actually two. We talk about the look back measurement a lot because if you have seasonal or people whose hours vary, then you probably do want to use the look back measurement. But if you have employees that are either bona fide full-time or part-time, you manage those hours, then you want to do the monthly measurement and forget all that look back stuff. But when you first hire someone, you look at them. Do you reasonably expect them to work full-time hours or not? If you can comfortably say, yes, I do expect them to work full-time hours. Then you offer them coverage and they get coverage at the end of the completion of the waiting period, or you offer it to them and they waive coverage. If you cannot say reasonably yes or no that they will work full-time hours and you have a lot of those employees, you probably should use the look back measurement method. And this is for variable hour. These are some definitions we're going to use. Variable hour, the employer doesn't know if they're going to work full-time or not. You see this a lot in nursing. Well, it's when I have them on call, or you see this a lot in the restaurant business. I don't know. This could be someone that ends up working a lot of shifts, or this could be somebody that only works on the weekends. I don't know. So that's going to be a variable hour. We've already gone over seasonal a lot, but now that we're not talking about calculation of size and we are talking about who to offer coverage to, we're talking 6 months now, not 4 months. We've talked a lot about temporary interns and per diems. You'll get this with nurses as well on the per diems. Again, let's measure them because we don't know if they're going to be full-time or not. The measurement period can be anywhere from 3 months to 12 months. But however long you measure them, you also prospectively have to give them coverage. So if I measure you for 6 months, then you average full-time hours, then you're going to be offered coverage for the next 6 months. I would say one of the biggest things we see is employers will say, yes, I use a 3-month measurement. So I measure them the first 3 months, and if they work full-time hours, I give them coverage forever and a day. That's not how it works. So if you measure them for 3 months, that means you're measuring them every 3 months. So you're measuring that person 4 times a year. And let me tell you, a 3-month measurement period, we do have some employers that use this, especially when it's a high turnover industry and they want to retain employees and give them coverage more quickly than say competitors do. I see this a lot in home health care. So that is one of the more difficult ones to do because the smallest stability period you can have is 6 months. And so there's lots of overlapping with measuring every 3 months, but they're guaranteed coverage for 6 months. Okay, so if a new employee averages, excuse me, full-time hours during the measurement period, then what do they get? They get corresponding coverage for the stability period going forward. If they don't qualify, then they don't get coverage for that amount of time. So I measured you for 12 months. You didn't average hours. Good. I didn't think you were going to be full-time anyway. Then they do not get coverage for the next 12 months unless they have a change in status. Next slide, please. And here are the 2 different types of measurement methods. We talked about the monthly. So the reason you don't want to use this for variable hour employees, it would have made more sense if the regulations say, you worked full-time hours in May and I give you coverage in June. That's not how the monthly measurement period works, unfortunately. You work full-time hours in May, I give you coverage in May. Well, if this is a variable hour employee and I was measuring them, I don't know what your hours are going to be until the end of the month. So I can't go back and give you coverage for the month that just happened. So that's why monthly really only works if you have predetermined full-time, part-time, bona fide. They always work the same number of hours. Look back is again for people we don't know their hours. One of the other nuances of this, and we aren't going into reporting too much on this for time reasons, but you do not provide a form to an employee who is the only people that get a form, the only people that get 1095Cs are people who were determined to be full-time for any month during the year. So for example, I hired somebody in November. They were in a waiting period, November and December. They don't get a form. I hired a variable hour employee in June of 2021. They're still in an initial measurement period. They don't get a form because they were not determined to be a full-time person for any month of 2021. Okay, next slide. For time reasons, that's the example I just went over. So I'm going to skip this one, Beth. This one too. And we'll have this if you want to look back at this later. So now we're going to, so they use a 6-month look back. Oh, this was going to be you. Oh, good.
It was
you
me. It's okay. You kind of took over my
I
shine
did.
here. It's okay.
I got on a roll and I was so excited. So if you want to go back to the examples, you feel free.
I actually won't. I will actually leave it here because, like, as you said, for time, and obviously go back into the slides once you receive these on Friday and look at the specific examples. But this is a good example. Leslie's employer uses a 6-month look back measurement period. Okay. And to make things easy, we said that the 6-month look back measurement period begins in January. And I say that makes it easy because let's say Leslie didn't start in January, then this would start some other time and it just makes it a little bit more difficult. Okay. But she averages full-time hours in January of that year, February, March, April, August, and September. Okay. So let's look back at the fact that this was a 6-month look back measurement period potentially. Now, mind you, if this were monthly, it's a little easy because Leslie is just going to be offered coverage each of these months that she averaged full-time hours. So then it's kind of easy. January, February, March, April, she's offered coverage. After that, she's going to be offered COBRA because she loses her coverage. And then in August and September, she is going to get coverage back. And then after that, offered COBRA again. So that's kind of easy on the monthly measurement side. On the look back measurement side, it's different because remember, we measured her for 6 months to then say in the next 6-month stability period, what is going to happen. And so for this one with the look back measurement method, she's going to be offered coverage for the 6-month stability period that corresponds to the work she did January through, let's say, June, because the assumption is that, okay, out of 6 months, there were 4 of them that she worked full-time hours, right? So chances are that she's going to average over 30 for the 6-month period because there's only 2 months where she did not work full-time hours. And then kind of again, for the next 6 months of the year, she only worked 2 of the months of the 6-month look back measurement period for that one. So the idea would be that the corresponding stability period after she works from July to December, or yeah, I think it's July to December, yeah, would not actually give her coverage. And so she would be offered COBRA during that time, and the employer would start this whole thing over again. Now, I'm sure some of you are on here and you're like, hey, well, what about Beth if in August and September she ended up working, let's say 100 hours a week every week? I don't even know if there's that many waking hours, but if that did happen, and she did somehow manage to average over the 30, even only working a few months of the year of the 6-month look back measurement method, that is possible. It is math and it is averages. Okay, so keep that in mind. So that gets us just to kind of the practical tips here. And really with the measurement method, Jill kind of alluded to this, but you really need to look at kind of your hiring practices and your demographics before you just say, well, we just want to do the look back measurement method. Because if you just hire a bunch of people who work full time all the time, then the look back measurement method is not necessary for you, right? Like everybody's going to get offer coverage immediately. And if you don't have a lot of turnover, then they're going to stay covered and it's not really a thing, right? Whereas if you are in a situation where you have high turnover, or some employees that for whatever reason you do not want to offer coverage immediately because they might not stay that long, then you would do the look back measurement method potentially, but you just want to make sure that the effort that you're going to have to expend to be able to follow that is worth the demographics of the employees that you have. I'll also mention that for the employers who get a tracker or a vendor to help them track their hours, you want to make sure that whatever measurement method you set with them for reporting, that's actually what you do in practice, because we find that that's often not necessarily the case. The employer might tell the vendor that they do look back measurement, but then they don't necessarily do that. And it becomes a problem if there's a change in status. So that kind of clues me in to start talking about changes in status, which is the next kind of difficult topic, if you will. And I'm going to rush through just the rules here. Really, when there is a change in status, we're talking about somebody going from, let's say, working full-time to working part-time. And with the employer mandate, we throw in that whole kind of concept of a variable hour employee as well. So if you see a change from, let's say, a variable hour employer is somebody who was measured to full-time, then that's also going to be, a change in status. And the rules here are really, really hard, but they're made to make sure that employers don't just basically change someone's status all the time to avoid offering them coverage, okay? And so really, whether the employee gets to remain on coverage or has to be knocked off of coverage is going to depend on a number of things. And we have represented that in this Venn diagram of the different issues that are going to come up that are going to determine whether or not that person continues to be offered coverage. And so, Jill, I'm going to steal one of your examples. I'll take the monthly because it's easy, right?
Do it.
If someone changes status on a monthly basis, so let's say Joe switches from full-time to part-time on May 20th, then guess what? He's not eligible on June 1st because he's part-time. That's pretty easy. He's going to be offered COBRA because he is going to lose coverage for that reduction of hours. But it's kind of easy on the monthly side because you either got it or you didn't. And if you switch status, then you're not going to be eligible anymore once you switch. But the look back measurement method is a lot more difficult. So Jill, I'll introduce you to start with this flow chart that we created for that.
Yes, I love these. Okay, so changes in status. One thing that still honestly blows my mind is that every employee is still kind of in a measurement period. If you're using look back measurement for any of your employees, everyone's kind of in one. So I'm a full-time employee, bona fide full-time employee at NFP. NFP uses a look back measurement method for some of our employees. Technically, I'm in one. So if I were to switch to part-time, that's when it would kick in. Not that you're doing these calculations for everybody, but if there's a change in status, that's when we would have to rely upon those hours or estimated hours. So this flow chart, we have some examples coming up, but actually let's go ahead and go to the next one so it'll be more clear. So I've highlighted the path we're going to take. So this is a change in status. On the left is full-time to part-time. On the right is part-time to full-time. So in this example, we have an existing variable part-timer switching to part-time from part-time to full-time. So the next question is this a new employee or is this an ongoing employee? It's an ongoing employee. So then we drop down. So now eligibility is not affected until end of stability period. And why is that? It's because of that last bullet there. They earned the status that they're in. So if this is somebody that's an ongoing employee and they have been measured in the past, they've been there for a full measurement period, they're in a stability period. They keep the status they had. Okay, next example. Now we're still going from part-time to full-time, but in this case, it's a new employee. We hired them and we thought they were going to be variable hour part-timer. So they're in a look back measurement period. But now this is not somebody that just happened to blip up a couple of times on more hours. These are bona fide changes in status. And so this person switched to a full-time position. And so if they're new and they haven't earned any type of status yet, they're not in a stability period, then their eligibility is impacted. Eligibility is affected the first day of the fourth month following the change in status. You could give them coverage earlier than that if you wanted to, if they were working full-time hours, but employer mandate minimum requirement, first of the fourth month following the change in status, they have to be offered coverage because that's the rule if they were hired into that position. Okay, now we're going to go on the other side of the chart, full-time to part-time, opposite. So again, somebody who has a bona fide change in status, not just hours dropping. So this person, full-time to part-time. Now, did we offer them coverage after the waiting period? In other words, we hired them as full-time, or did they earn full-time status in a measurement period? In this case, we hired them full-time, bona fide. They got coverage after the waiting period. So then we drop down. How long have they been working for us? Have they been employed for an entire measurement period, or are they new? We just hired them and they had this change. Nope, this person's been working for us for a long, long time. So eligibility may be terminated on the first day of the 4th month following the change if they actually are working part-time hours in between those months. Next slide. And then same exact example, but this is a new employee. New employee, we hired them full-time. We thought they were going to be working lots of hours. We offered them coverage after the waiting period, but here we are 5-6 months down the road. They have a switch to part-time. Maybe something happened. Maybe we don't have enough work for them. We've switched them to a part-time position. They're new. So here's a different case. We've been saying 4th month. Eligibility may be terminated at the end of the month in which the change in status changed. Why is that? Because if we hired them in that position, then we wouldn't have offered them coverage anyway. Okay, next slide. We do have this chart, a prettier chart actually, that marketing made us in this white paper that's referenced on the side. Insurers don't do this calculation for you. We do have vendors like that have the tracking tools that Beth mentioned, but this is for you and you have to keep these records. This shows why you were doing this.
Thank you, Jill. So that was look back measurement, and that was difficult. I think it's one of the hardest things we do in this job, frankly. Plan documentation is a little bit easier, but we find a lot of mistakes as it pertains to the look back measurement method. Remember that ERISA is going to require that the summary plan description actually includes information about eligibility. And when you're using the look back measurement method, if you're using that, then that affects when someone is eligible. And so it's going to be really important that there is language in the SPD that notifies employees of whether or not they're going to fall into a look back measurement method and what that means for their eligibility. Now, mind you, a lot of some of the vendors may or may not include language around the look back measurement method. I kind of happen to know that most of them will, even if it's not automatic. So if you need to ask them to include that language because they don't yet, then they can likely accommodate you. But then you also want to make sure that the plan is actually operated in accordance with the plan document. Okay, so you're going to want to work with your plan document vendor to make sure that this information is included in the SPD. And then once it's in there, you want to definitely operate the plan that way. Okay, and so also, sometimes we can run into the issue where an employer might put something in an SPD, but then let's say that they told their tracking vendor that they don't use the look back measurement, but then they have it enough. You just don't want any of those to not match, right? You don't want there to be a conflict because then if somebody kind of catches that issue, then you might be on the hook for, potentially an employer mandate penalty, or having to offer someone coverage because the fact that you communicated that they were going to be eligible when they weren't can cause issues there. Okay, so just make sure that your plan documentation matches what you are doing in practice as it pertains to the look back measurement method or the monthly method if that's what you use. So Jill, you want to end us out with just a couple of kind of conclusions?
Yes. So my number one takeaway, because we're at the time, just because you have a vendor that does this for you doesn't mean you were off the hook. Already this year, I have seen a 226J letter go to a client who's doing everything supposedly right. They're offering coverage, they're tracking hours. They got a 226J letter from the IRS with an estimated penalty of $5 million. I'm not joking. $5 million. And why? Because they were using a vendor and they did not review I can't tell you how many times I've seen this. Probably since this started, I've probably seen at least 40 that are above $100,000 for this one specific reason. Page 2 of the 1094C, did you offer coverage to substantially all of your employees? And it says no. No. That's like giving the IRS a 1040 form. Did you pay enough taxes? No. You're asking to be looked at. So If you are offering coverage to substantially all of your full-time employees and whatever software you're using spits out, no, you're not offering coverage, something's wrong. Something's either wrong with the data you're putting into the system, or something's wrong with your practice, or something's wrong on the form. Look at those forms. I always say you want to do 4 things for your reporting. Look at that 1094C, second page, columns A and B. Did you offer coverage? You want to pull your own 1095C. You know what your coverage should look like. Did you have coverage where you offered coverage? Pull your own 1095C. Pull somebody who was terminated in the middle of the year. Pull somebody that was hired in the middle of the year, because they will always look different. Minimum, do those 4 things to make sure that your reporting is right. That's it. That's my tale of woe.
Thank you, Jill, for that. And Amber, we'll kick it on out for the outro. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth and Jill, for sharing your valuable time and expertise with us today. To reiterate, today's presentation was recorded. We will be sharing the recordings in the follow-up email and on the NFP website. If there are any portions of this call that you missed, by Friday, you will receive an email with a link to the full recording. The PowerPoint slides used during this presentation will be shared in the same email. At the end of this call, a survey will populate in a new window. Please take a brief moment to complete this survey, as it lets us know what topics are important to our listeners and helps make our education program as current and relevant as possible. That concludes our webinar for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and have a great day.